The last rays of sunlight spilled across Daniel Cole's office. Outside the massive glass windows, the city glowed in shades of gold and orange. Thousands of people hurried through their evening routines, completely unaware that a battle was quietly unfolding on the top floor of RideSync Global. Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the skyline. Behind him, Rachel Morgan remained near the office door. The confidential file rested against her side. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavy. Finally, Rachel sighed. Daniel. He didn't turn around. What? Rachel studied him carefully. In all the years she had known him, she had learned something important. Whenever Daniel stared out the window like this, it meant he was wrestling with something he didn't want to admit. And right now, she already knew what that something was, Vanessa. You know this isn't about business anymore. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rachel continued. Maybe it started as a job interview. She lifted the folder slightly. But it stopped being a job interview the moment you recognized her. Daniel slowly turned around. His expression remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm that usually meant he was hiding something. Rachel hated that look, because it meant he had already made up his mind. I haven't hired her. Rachel laughed softly. No. You only continued her application process after 20 minutes of personal conversation. Daniel said nothing. Rachel walked closer. Do you know what everyone downstairs is talking about right now? Daniel raised an eyebrow. I don't care. That's the problem. Rachel's voice sharpened. You should care. She placed the folder on his desk. The executive team cares, the board cares, the investors care. Daniel glanced at the folder, then back at Rachel. Since when do investors decide who gets hired? Rachel folded her arms. Since the employee in question has a history with the CEO. The room fell silent again. Daniel's expression darkened. Rachel immediately knew she had hit a nerve. Good, because somebody needed to. For years, Daniel had built a reputation for being objective, logical, disciplined. Nobody could accuse him of favoritism, nobody until now. Rachel walked toward the window. Do you know how hard we've worked to build credibility? Daniel remained silent. We started RideSync in a room smaller than this office. We survived lawsuits. We survived debt. We survived competitors trying to bury us. Her voice softened. And now you're risking all of that because your ex-girlfriend walked back into your life. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That's not fair. Rachel turned. Isn't it? Daniel looked away. That alone told her everything. Because if he truly believed she was wrong, he would have argued. Instead, he stayed quiet. Rachel took a deep breath. She wasn't trying to attack him. She was trying to protect him. There was a difference. Unfortunately, Daniel couldn't see it. Not yet. You still love her. The words landed like a bomb. Daniel froze. Rachel watched every reaction. The slight tightening of his shoulders, the brief hesitation, the tiny flicker in his eyes. That was enough. He never answered, but he didn't need to. Rachel already had her answer. That's what I thought. Daniel exhaled slowly. You don't know what you're talking about. Rachel shook her head. Then tell me. Daniel said nothing. Tell me you looked at Vanessa today and felt absolutely nothing. Silence. Tell me seeing her again didn't affect you. More silence. Rachel's expression softened. Daniel, for the first time in 10 years, you're making decisions emotionally. Daniel looked toward the city again. The truth was, Rachel wasn't completely wrong. Seeing Vanessa again had shaken him, far more than he wanted to admit. When she first walked into that conference room, for a moment, it felt like time had stopped, like the last decade had never happened, like he was standing inside that tiny apartment again. Listening to her tell him she was leaving, the memory still hurt. And that was the problem. A man only hurts that much when he never truly lets go. Rachel noticed the change in his face. She knew exactly where his mind had gone. You're thinking about her? Daniel laughed bitterly. You're unbelievable, Rachel smiled. And I'm right, Daniel shook his head, but deep down he wasn't sure anymore. Because every argument Rachel made seemed to expose another truth he had been avoiding. The truth that Vanessa still mattered. The truth that seeing her again had reopened old wounds. And the truth that terrified him most. Part of him wanted a second chance. Not at a relationship, not necessarily, but at understanding why everything had fallen apart. Rachel stepped toward the desk. There's something else. Daniel looked at her. The seriousness in her voice immediately caught his attention. Rachel opened the confidential file. Then she pulled out several pages. I started reviewing Vanessa's background. Daniel frowned. So, Rachel hesitated. For the first time since entering the office, she looked uncertain. That immediately put Daniel on alert. Rachel Morgan was rarely uncertain about anything. What did you find? Rachel looked down at the papers, then back at him. Nothing illegal. Daniel relaxed slightly. But there it was. The word nobody wanted to hear, but. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Something doesn't add up. Daniel stared at her. What do you mean? Rachel slowly placed one page on the desk, a page Daniel couldn't see from where he stood. I think Vanessa may have left something out during her interview. Daniel's expression hardened. What exactly are you saying? Rachel looked him directly in the eye. I'm saying I don't think we know the full story. And suddenly, Daniel wasn't looking at the sunset anymore. He was looking at the file. The same file Rachel refused to take her eyes off, because whatever was inside it had just changed everything. Daniel stared at the file on his desk. The office suddenly felt smaller. The sunset no longer mattered. The skyline no longer mattered. Only one question mattered. What did you find? Rachel remained silent for a moment. Then she slowly sat down. That alone made Daniel uneasy. Rachel rarely sat during difficult conversations. She usually preferred to stand, control the room, control the conversation. But this time felt different, more serious, more personal. Rachel slid the first document toward him. I reviewed Vanessa's employment history. Daniel glanced at the page, and Rachel folded her hands. Everything looks impressive. Excellent performance reviews, strong recommendations, consistent promotions. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a good thing. It is. Rachel leaned forward. But that's not what concerns me. Daniel's patience was beginning to wear thin. Then get to the point. Rachel nodded. 3 years ago, Vanessa worked for a logistics company in Atlanta. Daniel looked at the page. The company name meant nothing to him. So? Rachel pulled out another document. According to her resume, she left voluntarily. Daniel frowned. Okay. Rachel placed another paper beside it. But, according to internal records, she paused. She didn't. Daniel looked up. For the first time, his attention sharpened completely. What are you saying? Rachel's eyes remained fixed on him. I'm saying the stories don't match. Daniel leaned back. His mind immediately began working. There could be a reasonable explanation. Rachel nodded. There could. But we don't know because she never mentioned it. The room fell silent. Daniel hated uncertainty, and Rachel knew it. That was why she was presenting facts instead of opinions. Facts were harder to ignore. Was she fired? Rachel shook her head. No. Daniel relaxed slightly. Then what? Rachel hesitated, which immediately made him nervous again, because Rachel almost never hesitated. Rachel. She looked down at the document, then back at him. The company dissolved 6 months later. Daniel frowned. I don't understand. Neither do I. Rachel tapped the page. Most employees stayed until the company collapsed. Vanessa left right before it happened. Daniel looked at the paperwork again. Still nothing seemed alarming, just unusual. Rachel could see what he was thinking. It's not proof of anything, Daniel nodded. Exactly, but it's enough to ask questions. Daniel stood up and walked toward the window. His reflection stared back at him. Part of him wanted Rachel to stop. Part of him wanted the entire conversation to disappear, because every question about Vanessa brought back another memory, another emotion, another wound he thought had healed years ago. Rachel watched him carefully. You know what worries me most? Daniel didn't answer. It isn't the employment records. He turned. Then what is it? Rachel sighed. The timing. Daniel frowned. What timing? Rachel stood. The fact that Vanessa suddenly appears now. Daniel stared at her. Rachel continued. 10 years. No calls. No messages. No attempts to reconnect. And then one day, she spread her hands. She walks into RideSync Global. Daniel's expression darkened. You're making assumptions, am I? Rachel held his gaze. Because from where I'm standing, the timing is awfully convenient. Daniel immediately knew where this conversation was heading, and he didn't like it, not one bit. You think she's here because of money. Rachel didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. The silence stretched between them. Daniel laughed bitterly. I expected better from you. Rachel's face softened. Daniel, I don't want to believe that. Then don't. But I also don't want you getting hurt. Those words hit harder than she intended. Because Rachel wasn't speaking as COO anymore. She was speaking as a friend. Someone who had watched Daniel suffer. Someone who remembered the nights he slept in the office. Someone who remembered the months after Vanessa left. Months when Daniel barely spoke. Months when he buried himself in work because it was easier than dealing with heartbreak. Rachel remembered all of it. Daniel did too, and that was exactly why this conversation hurt, because deep down, a small voice in his head had already asked the same question. Why now? Why after all these years? Why today? Why RideSync? Why him? The questions were impossible to ignore. A sudden knock interrupted the tension. Both of them turned toward the door. The executive assistant stepped inside. You asked to be notified when Vanessa left the building. Daniel immediately looked over. The assistant nodded. She just exited the headquarters. Something shifted inside the room. Rachel noticed it instantly. Daniel tried to hide it. Failed. Rachel shook her head. There it is. Daniel frowned. What that look? What look? Rachel smiled sadly. The look of a man who's still thinking about her. Daniel looked away. The assistant quietly left the office. The door clicked shut. Silence returned. Rachel gathered the documents, but before closing the folder, she froze. Daniel noticed. What? Rachel stared at one specific page. Her expression changed completely. Concern, confusion, then shock. Daniel immediately stepped forward. Rachel. She slowly lifted the paper, and for the first time that evening, Rachel looked genuinely alarmed. That's impossible. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. What is it? Rachel looked directly at him, then at the page, then back at him again. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel, this says Vanessa was in New York the night you thought she left you. Daniel froze. Every muscle in his body locked. The room seemed to disappear, because according to everything he had believed for 10 years, that couldn't be true. Before we continue, I have a question for you. Do you think Rachel is right to investigate Vanessa? Or should Daniel give Vanessa a second chance without digging into her past? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world, and you might get a shout out in the next episode. Now let's get back to the story. Daniel stared at Rachel. His mind refused to process what she had just said. This says Vanessa was in New York the night you thought she left you. The words echoed inside his head, again and again and again. Rachel lowered the document onto the desk. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt suffocating. Finally, Daniel shook his head. No. Rachel looked at him carefully. Daniel, no. His voice was firmer this time. That's impossible, because he remembered that night. Every second of it, every painful second, the restaurant, the humiliation, the businessman Vanessa left with, the look on her face, the words she said. He remembered all of it. So how could she have been in New York? It made no sense. Rachel picked up the document again. I thought the same thing. Daniel walked around the desk, his heartbeat growing faster. Show me. Rachel handed him the page. Daniel scanned it quickly, then again, then a third time. The document showed travel records, a business conference registration, hotel records, entry logs. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Vanessa had attended a corporate training event in New York. The date, the exact same date, the exact same week, the exact same period. Daniel remembered losing her forever. Daniel felt a chill run through his body. Because Rachel was right. That shouldn't be possible. Not unless something was missing. Rachel watched his expression change. You see the problem. Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely shaken. Rachel sat down, trying to make sense of it herself. Maybe it's an administrative error. Daniel immediately latched onto the possibility. It has to be. Rachel nodded. Maybe. But neither of them sounded convinced. Because corporate records rarely contained that many mistakes. Not multiple records. Not across multiple systems. Daniel sat heavily in his chair, his thoughts spiraling. The restaurant memory suddenly felt different, less certain, less solid. Questions began appearing. Questions he had never asked before. Questions he had never wanted to ask. Rachel broke the silence. Tell me exactly what happened that night. Daniel looked up, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing the memory unfold again. The restaurant. The luxury tables, the expensive suits, the laughter, the humiliation. Slowly, he began speaking. I was late. Rachel listened. My investor meeting ran longer than expected. He stared at the skyline. When I arrived, Vanessa was already angry. The memory still hurt, even after all these years. She said she was tired of waiting, tired of believing, tired of struggling. Rachel remained silent. Daniel continued. Then she stood up, his jaw tightened. Everyone was watching. The shame returned instantly, just like it had that night. She told me she deserved better. Rachel could hear the pain in his voice, even now, 10 years later. It was still there. Daniel looked down, and then she left. Another silence. Rachel frowned. Did she actually leave with the businessman? Daniel froze. The question caught him off guard. For years he had assumed she did, hadn't he? Or had he simply believed what his emotions wanted him to believe? Rachel noticed the hesitation. Immediately, Daniel, his eyes narrowed. I saw them leave together. Rachel leaned forward. Together, Daniel hesitated. The memory suddenly felt blurry, uncomfortable, incomplete. For the first time, he wasn't sure. Rachel could see it happening. A crack in the story. A crack in a memory Daniel had treated as fact for 10 years. What exactly did you see? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Trying to remember, trying to separate facts from assumptions. I saw him approach her. Rachel nodded. Then? They talked. Then? Daniel closed his eyes. The memory came in fragments, broken pieces, disconnected moments. I remember standing up. I remember being angry. I remember leaving. Rachel froze. You left! Daniel opened his eyes. The realization hit him immediately. He had left. Not Vanessa. Him. The room became silent. Rachel stared at him. Daniel stared back. Neither spoke, because they had just uncovered something neither expected. Daniel never actually saw Vanessa leave with the businessman. He assumed she did. The assumption became a memory, and the memory became a fact. For 10 years, Rachel slowly leaned back. Well, Daniel looked at her. Rachel's voice dropped. That's a problem. Daniel couldn't argue, because she was right. It was a massive problem. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't questioning Vanessa. He was questioning his own memory, and that was far more dangerous. A sudden vibration interrupted the silence. Rachel glanced at her phone, then frowned. Daniel noticed immediately. What now? Rachel looked at the screen. Her expression changed, confusion, then concern, then disbelief. That's strange. Daniel stood. What is it? Rachel slowly turned the screen toward him. An email recently received. Anonymous sender, no name, no company, no signature. Just one sentence. One sentence that made Daniel's blood run cold. Ask Vanessa what really happened at 10:43 p.m. Daniel froze. Rachel froze. Neither knew who sent it. Neither knew why, but both understood one thing, knew the truth. Someone knew the truth, and someone wanted them to find it. The office became completely silent. Daniel stared at the phone. Rachel stared at it too. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The anonymous message sat on the screen like a ticking bomb. Ask Vanessa what really happened at 10:43 p.m. 10 years. 10 entire years. And now someone was bringing up a specific minute from the night that changed everything. Rachel looked up first. Do you know what happened at 10:43 p.m.? Daniel shook his head slowly. No, his voice was barely above a whisper, because the truth was, he couldn't even remember what time the breakup happened. He remembered the pain, the humiliation, the anger, but not the exact time. Not after all these. Rachel immediately pulled a chair closer. Think. Daniel sat down heavily, his mind racing. The restaurant flashed through his memory, the tables, the guests, the businessman, Vanessa, the argument, the embarrassment, the heartbreak. Fragments. Only fragments, nothing clear. Rachel crossed her arms. This isn't random. Daniel nodded. No. If somebody sent this. Rachel glanced at the phone. Then somebody wants us looking at that specific moment. The room felt colder. Daniel couldn't explain why, but something about the message bothered him deeply, because anonymous messages usually came from one of two people, someone trying to help or someone trying to manipulate, and right now he had no idea which one this was. Rachel opened her laptop. What are you doing? I'm checking. Checking what? Rachel's fingers flew across the keyboard. Everything. Daniel walked around the desk, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. Then Rachel suddenly stopped typing. Her eyes narrowed. What? Rachel looked up. Do you still have the credit card you used back then? Daniel laughed. Rachel, that was 10 years ago. I know. But do you? Daniel frowned. Surprisingly. He did. The account was inactive now, but the bank still maintained archived records. Rachel immediately picked up her phone. We may be able to retrieve the transaction history. Daniel stared at her. You think a restaurant bill matters? Rachel's eyes locked onto his. Right now, everything matters. The seriousness in her voice made him uneasy, because Rachel was rarely wrong. And when she became obsessed with details, it usually meant she had found something important. Daniel sat down again. For the first time in years, he wanted answers more than he wanted closure. Rachel noticed, and that worried her, because she knew Daniel. Once he started digging, he wouldn't stop, not until he reached the truth, no matter how painful that truth turned out to be. An hour later, the city side had gone completely dark. Only the lights remained. Daniel and Rachel were still inside the office, still searching, still chasing a mystery neither fully understood. Then Rachel's phone rang. She answered immediately, listened and froze. Daniel stood up. What? Rachel didn't respond. The silence stretched. Then she slowly ended the call, her face pale. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. What happened? Rachel looked at him. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then finally, the restaurant still exists. Daniel blinked. What? The restaurant. Rachel grabbed her keys. It's still operating? Daniel stared at her. Trying to understand, Rachel continued. And according to the manager, her voice dropped. They still have archived security footage backups. The room went completely silent. Daniel felt every muscle in his body tense. Security footage. From that night. From the night everything ended. Rachel looked at him. Do you understand what that means? Daniel already did. If the footage existed, then the truth existed. Not assumptions, not memories, not emotions. The truth. Recorded, frozen in time. Waiting, Rachel grabbed her coat. Daniel grabbed his. Neither needed to say anything else, because they were both thinking the same thing. For 10 years, they had been living with one version of the story. And tonight, they might discover it was wrong. As they headed toward the elevator, Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Another message. Only 6 words. 6 words that made his blood run cold. Don't let Vanessa see the footage. The elevator doors opened. Rachel looked at him. Daniel looked back. Neither spoke, because suddenly, the mystery had become much bigger than Vanessa. Someone was watching. Someone knew what happened, and someone was terrified of the truth coming out. The black SUV moved through the city streets. Rain began falling lightly against the windshield. Inside the vehicle, neither Daniel nor Rachel spoke. The anonymous message remained fresh in their minds. Don't let Vanessa see the footage. Daniel looked out the window, his jaw clenched, his thoughts racing. The message changed everything. Because whoever sent it wasn't guessing. They knew about the footage. They knew about the investigation. And somehow, they knew exactly what Daniel and Rachel were doing. Rachel broke the silence. You haven't told anyone about this, have you? Daniel looked over. No. What about Vanessa, the executive team? No. Rachel frowned. Then whoever sent those messages is closer to this than we thought. Daniel hated how right she sounded. The SUV turned onto a familiar street. And suddenly, Daniel's stomach tightened. The restaurant, after all these years, it was still there. Different sign, different ownership, different decor. But the building remained the same. The place where his life changed forever. The place where he thought Vanessa destroyed his future. Or at least, that's what he believed until now. The manager greeted them at the entrance. A middle-aged man named Carlos, friendly, professional, completely unaware of the emotional weight this building carried. Rachel introduced herself, explained they were looking into a historical incident. Carlos listened carefully, then nodded. We do keep archived backups. Daniel froze. Rachel immediately leaned forward. You do? Carlos smiled. Not everything, but some footage was preserved when ownership changed. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was real. The footage actually existed after 10 years. Somehow, it still existed. Carlos led them downstairs, past the kitchens, past storage rooms, toward a small archive office. The atmosphere felt strangely tense, like walking toward a courtroom verdict. Rachel noticed Daniel's hands. They were shaking, very slightly. But enough. Still time to leave, Daniel laughed. Not a chance. Rachel nodded. She expected that answer, because Daniel had spent 10 years carrying questions, and now the answers were within reach. Carlos powered on an old computer system. The machine hummed loudly, ancient by modern standards, but operational. Several minutes passed. Then folders appeared, dates, years, archives, thousands of files. Daniel stared at the monitor, his heart pounding harder with every second. Carlos typed carefully, then suddenly stopped. There. Rachel leaned closer. Daniel did too. The date appeared on screen, the exact date. The night of the breakup, nobody spoke. Carlos clicked. Footage began loading, slowly, painfully slowly. Daniel wanted to scream at the computer. Move faster, load faster, tell me the truth. Finally, the video appeared, the restaurant, the tables, the guests, the same layout, the same atmosphere. A younger version of Daniel entered the frame. Daniel froze. Seeing his younger self felt surreal, like watching a stranger, yet also watching a ghost. Rachel looked over. Daniel nodded. He wasn't. Not even close, the footage continued. Young Daniel sat down. Vanessa sat across from him. The argument began. Even without audio, the tension was obvious. The frustration, the anger, the disappointment. Everything was visible. Daniel felt sick, because he remembered every second, or at least, he thought he did. Then the businessman appeared. Rachel immediately paused. That's him? Daniel nodded. The same man, the man Daniel believed Vanessa left him for, the man he'd hated for years. Rachel resumed playback. The businessman approached, spoke briefly, then something unexpected happened. Daniel frowned. What? Rachel leaned closer. The businessman handed Vanessa something. An envelope. Daniel's eyes widened. An envelope? That wasn't part of his memory at all. The footage continued. Vanessa looked shocked, completely shocked. She opened it, read something, then immediately sat down again. Daniel froze, because according to his memory, that wasn't what happened at all. Rachel looked at him. Did you know about this? No. His voice barely worked. No. The footage continued. Vanessa read the contents again and again, then she started crying. Rachel paused. The room became silent, very silent. Daniel couldn't look away from the screen because for 10 years, he remembered Vanessa as cold, cruel, heartless. But the woman on the screen looked devastated, absolutely devastated. Rachel whispered, That's not the face of someone celebrating. Daniel didn't answer, because she was right. Carlos continued forwarding through the footage. Minute by minute, the timestamp moved. 10:36 p.m., 10:38 p.m., 10:40 p.m. The room grew quieter. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Then finally the timestamp reached 10:43 p.m. Rachel's eyes widened. Daniel stepped closer. Carlos stopped touching the keyboard. The footage continued, and suddenly, a person entered the frame. A person neither Daniel nor Rachel expected. Daniel's face drained of color. His heart stopped, because the person walking toward Vanessa was someone he knew, someone he trusted, someone who should never have been there. Rachel stared at the screen, speechless. Daniel whispered, "No!" The video froze. Buffering, loading, the screen went black, and the old computer suddenly shut down. The room plunged into silence. Nobody could believe what they had just seen, because if Daniel's eyes hadn't deceived him, the person approaching Vanessa at 10:43 at 3 p.m. wasn't a stranger. It wasn't the businessman. It wasn't a waiter. It wasn't restaurant staff. It was someone from RideSync. The archive room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The old computer remained black. The screen dead. The fan inside the machine slowly spun down until even that sound disappeared. Daniel stared at the monitor, frozen. His pulse pounded in his ears. Because he knew that face, he knew it. Rachel could see it all over him. Daniel, no response. Daniel, still nothing. His eyes remained locked on the blank screen, as if staring hard enough would bring the footage back. Rachel stepped closer. Who was it? Daniel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. I don't know. Rachel narrowed her eyes. That's not true. Daniel looked away. Because it wasn't. He knew exactly who he thought he saw. The problem was, it didn't make sense. Not even a little. Carlos looked between them nervously. I can try restarting the system. Rachel nodded immediately. Do it? Carlos rushed back to the computer. The machine slowly rebooted, painfully slow. Every second felt like torture. Daniel paced the room, back and forth, back and forth. The image wouldn't leave his mind, the silhouette, the walk, the posture. Even from a distance, it looked familiar. Too familiar. Rachel finally stopped him. Who do you think it was? Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. No! Rachel folded her arms. Tell me, no, Daniel. He looked directly at her, and for the first time all night, Rachel saw genuine fear. Not anxiety, not confusion, fear. If I'm right, his voice lowered. None of this makes sense anymore. The room became quiet. Rachel didn't push further because she knew Daniel. If he wasn't ready to say it yet, nothing would make him. 10 minutes later, the computer finally restarted. Carlos immediately reloaded the archive. Everyone moved closer. The footage began playing again. 10:40 p.m., 10:41 p.m., 10:42 p.m. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. Rachel leaned forward. Carlos held his breath. Then, 10:43 p.m., the figure appeared again. Walking toward Vanessa, the image sharpened, frame by frame, step by step. Closer, 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 until finally, the face became visible. Rachel's eyes widened. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Carlos whispered, "Holy." Nobody finished the sentence because nobody could believe what they were seeing. The man approaching Vanessa wasn't from RideSync. At least not officially, not anymore. The man had worked for RideSync years ago, in the very beginning, back when the company was barely surviving, back before investors, back before success, back before the skyscraper. Daniel stared at the screen. His voice barely worked. Marcus. Rachel looked at him. You know, Daniel laughed bitterly. Know him? Marcus wasn't some former employee. Marcus was one of RideSync's original founders, one of the first 3 people involved in the company, and one of the first people to leave. The footage continued. Marcus sat beside Vanessa. The timestamp remained visible, 10:43 p.m., the exact minute from the anonymous message. Vanessa looked shocked to see him. Genuinely shocked, that much was obvious. Whatever this meeting was, it wasn't planned. Rachel immediately noticed something else. Wait, Daniel looked over. What? Rachel pointed at the screen. Marcus wasn't smiling. He wasn't relaxed. He wasn't friendly. He looked nervous, extremely nervous, as though he had rushed there, as though something urgent had happened. Daniel felt a knot forming in his stomach because he remembered Marcus. Marcus was many things. Ambitious, brilliant, stubborn, but nervous? Never. Something was wrong. Very wrong, the footage continued. Marcus handed Vanessa something, not an envelope, a small folded piece of paper. Vanessa opened it, read it, then immediately covered her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Rachel froze. Daniel froze. Carlos froze. Because whatever was written on that paper, it changed Vanessa instantly. The woman who had looked angry moments earlier suddenly looked devastated. Completely devastated. Daniel stared, unable to understand, unable to breathe, because none of this matched the story he'd believed for 10 years. Not one part of it. The footage continued. Then Marcus leaned forward and said something. Of course, there was no audio, but his lips were visible. Rachel squinted, trying to read them. Daniel tried too. Then suddenly Rachel's eyes widened. What? Rachel looked at him. I think I know what he said. Daniel stepped closer. What did he say? Rachel replayed the frame again and again. Then she slowly whispered. I think he said. She hesitated, not wanting to believe it herself. Then finally, I think he said, Daniel doesn't know. The room became silent. Dead silent. Daniel's stomach dropped. Because if Rachel was right, then Marcus and Vanessa were discussing something Daniel never knew about, something important enough to destroy her, something important enough to make Marcus show up unexpectedly, something important enough for an anonymous person to contact them 10 years later. Then the footage reached another shocking moment. Vanessa stood up, not calmly, not confidently. She looked panicked, desperate, and then she ran, straight out of the restaurant alone. No businessman, no Marcus, nobody. She left alone. Daniel froze. His entire version of events shattered instantly. Because for 10 years, he believed Vanessa walked away with another man. But the footage showed something completely different. Vanessa ran out of the restaurant crying, by herself. Rachel slowly turned toward Daniel. Neither spoke, because both were realizing the same thing. If Vanessa didn't leave with another man, then what actually happened that night? And more importantly, why had Marcus been there? The old computer suddenly beeped. A new notification appeared, an archived file, previously unopened, attached to the same footage. Date, 10 years ago. Sender, Marcus Reed, subject line, if anything happens to me, give this to Daniel. The room went completely silent. Daniel's blood ran cold because Marcus Reed had disappeared 8 years ago. Nobody had heard from him since, and suddenly his name was back. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The file sat on the screen, waiting. The room felt frozen in time. Daniel stared at the subject line. If anything happens to me, give this to Daniel. His pulse hammered against his chest. Marcus Reed, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. A name tied to the earliest days of RideSync, the days before success, before investors, before skyscrapers, before everything. Rachel looked at him. Daniel, he didn't answer. Because memories were flooding back, memories he had buried, memories he hadn't wanted to revisit. Carlos quietly stepped away from the computer, sensing this was no longer his business. This was something much deeper, much darker, much more personal. Rachel broke the silence. You told me Marcus left. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what everyone believed. Rachel frowned. What does that mean? Daniel pulled a chair closer, his eyes fixed on the screen. Then he finally spoke. RideSync wasn't my idea alone. Rachel looked surprised. Daniel laughed softly, a sad laugh. Most people think I built RideSync by myself. Another pause. They're wrong. The room became silent, because Rachel had never heard this story. Not completely. Very few people had, Daniel continued. At the beginning, there were three of us. Rachel listened carefully, me, Marcus, and Ethan. The name meant nothing to Rachel. Yet, Daniel's expression darkened. But Marcus was different. How? Daniel stared into the distance, thinking, remembering. He saw things before everyone else. He predicted problems before they happened. He understood people. Another pause. He was the smartest person I've ever worked with. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Smarter than you? Daniel smiled. Much smarter. The answer surprised her. Because Daniel almost never praised anyone that highly. Daniel stood, walking slowly around the room, lost in thought. The problem was, his voice lowered. Marcus didn't trust people. Rachel immediately noticed the shift. The admiration had disappeared. Now came the warning. He thought everyone had an agenda. Everyone. Investors, clients, partners, friends. Rachel folded her arms. And Vanessa? Daniel stopped walking. That question landed differently. Because suddenly, Vanessa and Marcus were connected. A connection Daniel never knew existed. Apparently, the answer felt strange. Wrong. Impossible. Yet the footage didn't lie. Marcus had met Vanessa. Privately, on the most important night of Daniel's life, and he'd hidden it. For 10 years, Rachel looked back at the monitor, opened the file. Daniel froze. For the first time all evening, fear appeared in his eyes. Real fear. Rachel noticed immediately. You don't want to know what's inside. It wasn't a question Daniel didn't answer, because she was right. Part of him desperately wanted answers. The other part feared those answers, because once the truth comes out, you can never go back. You can never unknow it. Rachel clicked the file. Nothing happened. She frowned, clicked again, still nothing. Then a password prompt appeared. The room collectively groaned. Carlos shook his head. A protected archive. Rachel leaned closer. Can we bypass it? Carlos thought for a moment. Eventually. How long? Hours. Daniel exhaled. Hours felt unbearable. After everything they'd discovered. After everything they'd learned. Now they had to wait. Then Rachel noticed something. A note attached beneath the file. Just one line. A short message, barely visible. Rachel leaned closer, reading carefully, then her eyes widened. Daniel noticed immediately. What? Rachel didn't answer. She reread it. Twice, 3 times, then slowly turned the screen toward him. Daniel read the sentence, and instantly felt the blood drain from his face. The note said, Vanessa was never the problem. The room became silent. Dead silent. Rachel stared at Daniel. Daniel stared at the screen, because those 5 words changed everything. For 10 years, Daniel believed Vanessa was the reason his life fell apart. the reason his heart broke, the reason he suffered, the reason he nearly quit. But Marcus, the man who knew the whole story, was saying the exact opposite. Rachel slowly sat down, trying to process it. If Vanessa wasn't the problem, she looked at Daniel, then who was? Nobody had an answer. Not yet. But for the first time, the investigation had stopped being about Vanessa. Now it was about something much bigger, something hidden, something buried, something someone had worked very hard to keep secret. For 10 years, Daniel's phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. Again. The same anonymous sender. Rachel immediately looked over. Daniel opened the message. His face went pale. Rachel grabbed the phone and read the text herself, only one sentence. But it changed everything. Ethan is still watching. Rachel's eyes widened. Daniel froze. Because Ethan wasn't just a former co-founder. Ethan was supposed to be dead. The message remained on Daniel's phone. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The words felt impossible. Ethan is still watching. Rachel read it again, then again, as if reading it enough times would somehow make it less absurd. It didn't. Daniel slowly sat down, his hands trembling. For the first time that night, Rachel looked genuinely worried. Not about Vanessa, not about RideSync, about Daniel. Because the expression on his face wasn't confusion. It was fear, pure fear. Daniel, no response. Talk to me. Still nothing. Rachel stepped closer. What aren't you telling me? Daniel stared at the floor, lost somewhere 10 years in the past. Finally, he whispered, Ethan wasn't supposed to die. The room fell silent. Rachel froze. Carlos froze. Even the hum of the old computer suddenly seemed louder. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant, haunted. Everybody thinks Ethan died in an accident. Rachel nodded. That's what the company history says. Daniel laughed bitterly, a laugh completely devoid of humor. Because that's what we told people. Rachel's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Daniel looked up. For the first time all evening, the billionaire CEO was gone. In his place sat the exhausted young entrepreneur from years ago, the one who had lost everything, the one who still carried scars nobody could see. It wasn't an accident. The room became silent. Rachel felt her heartbeat accelerate. What happened? Daniel looked toward the rain-covered window, then slowly began speaking. 10 years ago, his voice lowered. RideSync was falling apart. The memories returned instantly. Investors pulling out, bills piling up, employees quitting, everything collapsing. Ethan wanted out. Rachel listened carefully. He thought the company was finished. Daniel nodded. He wanted us to sell what little we had left. And Marcus? Daniel laughed softly. Marcus wanted to fight. Of course he did. That sounded exactly like Marcus. Rachel could already see the conflict forming. 3 founders, 3 different visions, 3 desperate men. The arguments got worse. Daniel continued, every week, every day. Eventually, the company stopped feeling like a partnership. It became a battlefield. Marcus and Ethan barely spoke. Ethan accused Marcus of being paranoid. Marcus accused Ethan of hiding things. Rachel frowned. Hiding what? Daniel shook his head. I never found out. The answer bothered him even now. Because Marcus kept insisting something was wrong. Something nobody else could see. Something dangerous. And yet, he never explained it clearly. At least not to Daniel. Then Daniel stopped talking. Rachel immediately noticed. There was more, much more. And he wasn't sure he wanted to say it. Daniel, he looked at her. What happened to Ethan? The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, unavoidable. Finally, Daniel answered. Ethan disappeared. Rachel blinked. What? Daniel nodded slowly. He disappeared. No body, no witnesses, no confirmation, nothing. Just gone. One day he was there. The next day he wasn't. Rachel stared, speechless, because that wasn't what RideSync's official history said. Not even close. The official story said Ethan died, not disappeared died. Daniel could see the confusion in her eyes. After 6 months, he sighed. Everyone assumed he was dead. The company moved on, investors moved on, the police stopped looking. Life continued, at least on the surface. Rachel slowly stood, her mind racing. Daniel, his eyes met hers. If Ethan never died, the implication hit both of them simultaneously. Neither wanted to say it aloud, because saying it would make it real. Rachel finally whispered, then somebody lied. Daniel nodded, slowly. Painfully, yes. The old computer suddenly beeped. All 3 heads turned. The archived file, Marcus's file, the password prompt was gone. Carlos looked surprised. Rachel looked confused. Daniel stared. Because nobody had entered a password, nobody had touched the keyboard. Yet somehow, the file had opened itself. One document appeared, just one, a letter, written by Marcus dated 10 years ago. The first line appeared on screen. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Rachel's eyes widened, because the letter began with 6 words that changed everything. Daniel, Ethan betrayed all of us. Nobody spoke, nobody moved, the room felt frozen. Daniel stared at the sentence, unable to look away, because suddenly, the breakup, Vanessa, the anonymous messages, Marcus, Ethan, the footage, everything. Everything seemed connected. The question was how, and the answer was sitting inside that letter, waiting to be read. Quick question before we continue. What do you think Marcus's letter is about to reveal? Comment your theory below. And tell me where you're watching from for a chance to be featured in a shout-out in an upcoming episode. Now let's see what happens next. Nobody moved. The archive room was completely silent. Rain tapped softly against the basement window. The old computer screen glowed in the darkness, and on that screen sat 6 words that had just shattered 10 years of assumptions. Daniel, Ethan betrayed all of us. Daniel stared at the sentence. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. Rachel sat frozen beside him. Neither knew what to say, because if Marcus was telling the truth, then everything they believed about RideSync's early years was a lie. Daniel slowly lowered himself into a chair, his eyes never leaving the screen. Open it. Rachel didn't hesitate. She clicked. The rest of the letter appeared. Daniel, if you're reading this, then something happened to me. Maybe I disappeared. Maybe somebody convinced you I was crazy. Maybe nobody believed me. But if this letter survived, then at least part of the truth survived too. The room grew colder. Rachel exchanged a glance with Daniel. Neither liked where this was going. The letter continued. Ethan wasn't trying to save RideSync, he was trying to take it. Daniel froze. What? Rachel whispered. The letter continued. For months I watched him meet people in secret. Investors we never approved, consultants we never hired, lawyers we never spoke to. At first I thought he was helping. Then I realized he was building something behind our backs. Daniel felt his stomach tighten, because suddenly, a dozen old memories made more sense. Arguments, late-night phone calls, meetings Ethan refused to explain. Things Daniel ignored because he trusted him. Rachel kept reading. I tried warning you. You didn't listen. You thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But I wasn't wrong. Daniel looked away. Because Marcus was right. He hadn't listened. Not once. Every time Marcus raised concerns, Daniel dismissed them. Told him to focus on the company. Told him to stop chasing conspiracies. Told him he was imagining things. The guilt hit harder than expected. Then Rachel suddenly stopped reading. Her eyes widened. Daniel immediately noticed. What? Rachel pointed to the next paragraph. Daniel leaned forward and felt his blood run cold. The worst part isn't what Ethan did to RideSync. The worst part is what he did to Vanessa. The room became silent, dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, because suddenly the entire story connected. RideSync, Marcus, Ethan, Vanessa, all connected somehow. Rachel slowly continued reading. Vanessa was never supposed to be involved. She was collateral damage. Daniel's face drained of color. Collateral damage? What did that even mean? Rachel continued. She accidentally discovered something she shouldn't have seen. Daniel's hands clenched. What did she discover? Rachel looked at him. The letter didn't say, not yet, and somehow that made it worse. The next paragraph appeared. When Vanessa found out, she came to me. She was scared, terrified, actually. Daniel blinked. His mind struggled to process the information. Vanessa went to Marcus? When? Why? For 10 years he thought she abandoned him. Yet according to this letter, she had been secretly meeting Marcus. Not to betray him, to ask for help, Rachel continued reading. I told her not to tell Daniel. Daniel immediately stood. What? Carlos jumped. Rachel looked up. Daniel's voice echoed through the room. He told her not to tell me? Rachel nodded slowly. Daniel began pacing. Anger, confusion, frustration, everything crashing together because nothing made sense anymore. Every answer created 3 new questions. Rachel read the next line, then stopped, completely stopped. Daniel noticed instantly. What now? Rachel looked up. Speechless, the color had drained from her face. Daniel grabbed the chair. Rachel. She swallowed hard, then slowly read the sentence aloud. The night Vanessa left you wasn't her choice. The room froze. Daniel froze. Time itself seemed to stop, because that sentence changed everything. Everything. For 10 years, he believed Vanessa chose to leave. For 10 years, he blamed her, hated her, missed her, resented her. And now Marcus was claiming she never had a choice. Daniel sat back down slowly, his legs suddenly weak, his entire world shifting beneath him. Rachel stared at the screen, unable to look away, because she already knew the next paragraph was going to change everything again, and somehow, she wasn't sure Daniel was ready for it. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page. More text remained, much more. And whatever Marcus was about to reveal had been buried for 10 years. The room felt frozen. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The old computer screen illuminated their faces, and at the center of it all sat one sentence. The night Vanessa left you wasn't her choice. Daniel stared at those words again and again and again. His entire understanding of the past was collapsing. Rachel slowly looked toward him, but she said nothing, because there was nothing she could say. Not yet. The answers were still inside the letter, waiting. Rachel took a deep breath, then continued reading. Daniel, If you've reached this part of the letter, then you deserve the truth. Vanessa discovered financial records Ethan was hiding. The room immediately became silent. Daniel frowned. Financial records? Rachel kept reading. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she realized money was disappearing. Large amounts. Money that never appeared on official company reports. Daniel's heart dropped, because RideSync was barely surviving back then. Every dollar mattered. Every single dollar. If money was disappearing, someone would have noticed, wouldn't they? The letter continued. Vanessa showed me the documents. I checked them myself. She was right. The money was real, the missing transactions were real, and Ethan was involved. Rachel stopped, slowly lowering her eyes. Daniel felt sick, because suddenly, the arguments, the tension, Marcus's paranoia, it all started making sense. Not completely, but enough. Enough to frighten him. Keep reading. His voice sounded distant, even to himself. Rachel nodded. We planned to tell you together. But Ethan found out first. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body locked. Rachel's eyes widened. The room felt colder, much colder. I don't know how he found out. But suddenly, he knew everything. He knew Vanessa had seen the records. He knew I had copies. And he knew we were planning to expose him. Daniel stood, unable to sit anymore. His heart pounded. His breathing became shallow, because the story was heading somewhere dark. Very dark. Rachel continued. 3 days before the restaurant incident, Ethan confronted Vanessa. Alone, without witnesses. Daniel's face hardened. What did he do? Rachel swallowed, then continued. He told her if she spoke, RideSync would collapse. Investors would flee, employees would lose jobs, you would lose everything. Daniel stared at the screen, speechless, because 10 years ago, that threat would have worked. RideSync was hanging by a thread. One major scandal would have destroyed the company. Rachel kept reading. Vanessa didn't care about herself. She cared about you. The room went silent again. Daniel looked away, unable to process it. Unable to accept it, she asked me what she should do. I told her we would find another way, but Ethan wasn't finished. Rachel stopped, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel noticed. That scared him, because Rachel rarely got emotional. What? Rachel looked at him, then back at the screen. The next paragraph made her uneasy, very uneasy. Ethan told Vanessa that if she stayed with Daniel, Daniel would be destroyed with the company. He convinced her the only way to protect Daniel was to leave. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. Rachel immediately grabbed the desk. The room blurred, just for a second. Then reality returned, because suddenly, everything connected. The restaurant, the tears, the envelope, the panic, the running, everything, everything. Vanessa hadn't been choosing wealth. She hadn't been choosing another man. She hadn't been choosing a better life. According to Marcus, she thought she was protecting Daniel. Daniel lowered himself into a chair, his hands covering his face. 10 years of anger, 10 years of blame, 10 years of believing she abandoned him, and now, a dead co-founder was claiming the exact opposite. Rachel continued reading, her voice quieter now, almost gentle. The envelope Vanessa received that night came from me. Inside were copies of the evidence. I wanted her to finally tell you the truth. Daniel immediately looked up, the envelope, the footage, the thing he'd never understood. Now it made sense. Marcus sent it, not the businessman. Not Vanessa, Marcus. Rachel kept reading, then suddenly stopped. Again, Daniel's stomach dropped. Every time she stopped reading lately, something terrible followed. What now? Rachel didn't answer immediately. She stared at the screen, completely still. Daniel stood, walked closer, and read the next sentence himself. The moment he did, his blood ran cold. Daniel wasn't acting alone. The room froze. Rachel looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Rachel. Neither spoke, because one terrifying realization hit them both at exactly the same time. If Ethan had help, then someone else knew the truth. Someone else was involved. Someone else had hidden it for 10 years. And there was a very real chance that person was still inside RideSync Global. The archive room felt suffocating. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The rain outside had become heavier. Water hammered against the small basement windows. But inside, the only thing anyone could hear was their own heartbeat, because Marcus's final sentence remained on the screen. Ethan wasn't acting alone. Daniel stared at it, trying to process everything, trying to make sense of 10 years of lies. Rachel leaned against the desk, her mind racing, because this had become much bigger than an old breakup, much bigger than Vanessa, much bigger than Ethan. Someone else had helped bury the truth. Someone else had helped destroy lives. And somehow, that person had escaped consequences for a decade. Rachel slowly continued reading. The next section of Marcus's letter appeared. I never discovered who Ethan was working with, but I know they were inside the company. Someone close. Someone with access. Daniel's stomach tightened. Close. The word bothered him because RideSync had been tiny back then. Very tiny. There weren't many people. meaning the list of suspects was short, dangerously short, the letter continued. I tried tracing the missing money. Every trail eventually disappeared. Every document vanished. Every lead went nowhere. Rachel frowned. Someone was cleaning up after him. Daniel nodded slowly. That was exactly what it sounded like. Not random mistakes, not bad bookkeeping. Cover-ups, deliberate cover-ups. Rachel kept reading. The person helping Ethan was smarter than both of us. They never left fingerprints. They never appeared on paper. But they were there. Daniel felt a chill run through him. Because Marcus wasn't describing a careless criminal. He was describing someone methodical, patient, dangerous. The next paragraph appeared, and suddenly Marcus's tone changed. It became personal, urgent, almost desperate. If you're reading this, then one of two things happened. Either I failed, or they finally made their move. Rachel looked up immediately. Made their move? Daniel felt his pulse accelerate because he didn't like the implication. Not one bit. The letter continued. If Vanessa ever comes back into your life, be careful, because her return means somebody is nervous. The room froze, dead silent. Rachel looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Rachel. Neither needed to say it aloud, because they were thinking the same thing. Vanessa's return wasn't random. According to Marcus, it never was. Daniel immediately remembered the anonymous messages, the footage, the warnings, everything. Someone had been watching, someone had been guiding them, someone had wanted them to discover the truth. But why now? Why after 10 years? Rachel suddenly stood upright, a thought hitting her, hard. Daniel, his eyes met hers. What? Rachel's voice dropped. What if Vanessa didn't come back by coincidence? Daniel frowned. What are you saying? Rachel took a deep breath. What if somebody wanted her here? The room fell silent again, because that possibility changed everything. Daniel's phone suddenly vibrated, again. Unknown number, the same sender, the same person. Rachel immediately stepped closer. Daniel opened the message. And this time, there was no cryptic clue, no mystery, no riddle, just a photograph. A recent photograph, taken inside RideSync Global Headquarters. Daniel's blood turned cold, because the picture showed Vanessa, standing in the executive lobby, the exact day of her interview. The exact moment she entered the building, someone had been watching her. Rachel grabbed the phone, then froze. Daniel. Her voice barely worked. What? Rachel zoomed in. Closer, closer. Then she handed him the phone. Daniel stared, his face drained of color, because reflected in the glass behind Vanessa was a man, watching her, watching everything. And Daniel recognized him immediately. Not from the present, from 10 years ago. The photo slipped from his hand. Rachel's voice shook. That's impossible, Daniel whispered. No, because the man in the reflection, the man secretly watching Vanessa, looked exactly like Ethan. Before we jump into the explosive finale, I want to hear from you. Do you think Ethan is really alive? Or is someone using his identity to manipulate Daniel and Rachel? Drop your theory in the comments below. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. You might get a special shout out in the next episode. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The photograph lay on the floor between Daniel and Rachel. The image that changed everything. The image that shouldn't exist. The image that made 10 years of assumptions collapse in a matter of seconds. Daniel picked up the phone again, his hands trembling, his eyes fixed on the reflection, the man standing behind Vanessa, partially hidden, watching, waiting, observing. Rachel leaned closer, trying to convince herself she was mistaken, trying to find another explanation, any explanation. But there wasn't one. The face was unmistakable. The posture, the build, the eyes, everything. Ethan, this can't be real. Rachel finally broke the silence. Daniel didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. For years, he believed Ethan was dead. For years, everyone believed Ethan was dead. But tonight, everything they believed had turned out to be wrong. Vanessa, Marcus, the breakup, the money, the lies. So why not Ethan too? Rachel grabbed the phone, zooming in further, pixel by pixel, detail by detail. Then suddenly she froze. Daniel noticed immediately. What? Rachel stared at the image, then slowly whispered, Look at his badge. Daniel leaned closer. At first he didn't see it. Then he did. A RideSync access badge hanging from the man's neck. His stomach dropped, because the badge wasn't old. It wasn't from 10 years ago. It was current, modern, recently issued, meaning only one thing. Whoever that man was, he had access to RideSync headquarters right now. The archive room fell silent again. Rachel slowly lowered the phone. Someone let him in. Daniel nodded. Someone had, which meant Marcus was right. Someone inside RideSync was helping, still helping, even now. After all these years, then another realization hit Daniel. Hard, he immediately stood. Rachel looked up. What? Daniel's voice turned cold. Vanessa. Rachel frowned. What about her? Daniel looked toward the door. If Ethan is alive, his expression darkened. Then Vanessa may be in danger. The room froze, because suddenly everyone understood. If Vanessa knew something 10 years ago, and if Ethan had spent 10 years hiding the truth, then her return wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Daniel immediately pulled out his phone, dialed Vanessa's number. The call rang once, twice, three times, no answer. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. He called again, nothing. Again, nothing. Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. Maybe she's asleep? Daniel didn't believe that, not for a second. Neither did Rachel. Then Vanessa finally sent a text. A single text. Nothing more, nothing less. The message appeared on screen. Daniel opened it and immediately felt his blood run cold. Daniel, I think someone is following me. The room exploded into motion. Rachel stood. Daniel grabbed his coat. Carlos stepped aside. Nobody needed to discuss it. Nobody needed to debate it. Something was happening. Right now, Daniel called immediately. This time, Vanessa answered, breathing heavily, almost panicking. Daniel. Her voice shook. Where are you? Daniel was already moving, heading for the exit. Vanessa, tell me where you are. Silence then. I didn't know who else to call. The fear in her voice was real, terrifyingly real. Daniel pushed through the restaurant doors. Rain pouring from the sky, Rachel close behind. Vanessa, where are you? More silence. Then finally, the old warehouse. Daniel froze. Rachel froze, because they both knew exactly which warehouse she meant. The original ride-sync warehouse. The place where everything started. The place where Marcus, Ethan, and Daniel built the company from nothing. Daniel's stomach dropped. Because that wasn't a coincidence, not anymore. Nothing was. Then Vanessa whispered something that made the blood drain from his face. 3 words, only 3, but enough to change everything. He's here, Daniel. The call suddenly disconnected. Dead, gone, nothing. Only silence. The rain hammered the pavement. Daniel stared at the phone. Rachel stared at him. Neither spoke, because they both knew exactly who Vanessa meant. Daniel sprinted toward the SUV. Rachel followed. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched across the wet road, and as they disappeared into the storm, neither of them noticed another vehicle pulling out behind them, following, watching, waiting. Meanwhile, inside the abandoned ride-sync warehouse, Vanessa stood alone. Rain leaking through the broken roof, darkness surrounding her, the old building silent, empty, forgotten, at least. That's what she thought. Slowly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Vanessa's eyes widened. Terror filled her face, because she recognized him immediately. The man she hadn't seen in 10 years. The man everyone believed was dead. The man at the center of every secret. The man who smiled before speaking. Hello, Vanessa.